Great. Well, I'm really pleased to introduce the next guest in our interview series. So I just finished reading her book this last month. It's called The Hungry Mind, and it's all about how curiosity develops in children. And I think for me, one of the things that was fascinating was also what stifles curiosity. So I'm really pleased to bring to our Words and Wonder interview Susan Engel from Williams College in Massachusetts. She's a senior lecturer in psychology, and she sort of helps direct the teaching program as well. So welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much. Very nice to talk to you.
So I always ask my guests, this first question is, what has recently made you go, wow? What's made you wonder of late?
Oh my gosh, too many things, and not all of them good. To be honest, these neither of these are particularly uplifting. But I have to admit that I was really affected by how wrong I was in predicting this pandemic. So I'm someone that reads a lot of science. I love science, and I depend on it for the way I think and what I know and how I live my life. And I totally did not get this right. If I went back, 9 months from now, I had no idea what was about to happen. And that was a terrible thing that had happened, but it was very good for me personally at my age to be reminded how wrong I can be. And how many ways there are to misunderstand the information coming in or the limits of your predictions. So that's one thing that has made me go, wow. And to be totally honest, another thing that makes me go, wow, is connected to that, which is how hard it is for most people to understand what's required to help reduce the effect of the pandemic. Here in the United States, there are just so many people who don't seem to understand the information or know how to use it to guide what they do every day. And those are awfully serious topics to bring up, I imagine, for your program and your interest, but they relate to something that really interests me, which is how do we help children become good thinkers? And particularly, what role might curiosity play in that process? So it all connects back to what I really do in my work life, but it's been very personal for me too.
Yeah, and I think one of the things in my work, particularly because I use a lot of magic tricks to show unexpected or counterintuitive results, that almost naturally piques curiosity. But what you're saying is this sort of unexpected pandemic and just actually how we engage with the change process. And I think when it's something so big and scary, we often hide away or lock our thinking in, don't we?
Yes, so that's a really great point, and something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about. And we'll probably get to this later because of your interest in the word wonder. My experience is that people trivialize curiosity especially in childhood, by thinking of it as this delightful little thing that happens in an unexpected moment. There's sort of like, oh, what's that? I'm going to find out. And that's true. Much of the time, the feeling of curiosity is very pleasurable, and especially for those of us that love to seek new information. But it's not always just, a cupcake or a tea time. Sometimes it's about things that are quite unsettling. I have a new book coming out in the fall that really picks up with the curiosity book left off. And one of the things I write about a lot in there are the things children are curious about that aren't quite so adorable or cheerful.
Yeah.
So my example about myself fits with that. Yeah. And to your point, it's easy to close down and not be curious when you're scared about something. And the interesting thing is to go in the other direction.
Yeah, because I think there's so much to unpack there, and I can't wait for this book to come out. I think for me, I would say I'm naturally curious, but equally the dark side of my curiosity is I often overthink things, and that leads to anxiety and sort of lack of sleep. And I always say for me, wonder and worry are the two sides of the same coin.
What a fabulous way to put it. I wish I had put that in my new book, because that's exactly right, I think. And so the interesting challenge for people like you and me, because I'm the same as you, I speculate a lot, I imagine things, daydream, but I also worry a lot. And the key is holding on to those, letting them coexist in your mind.
Yeah, and I think that for me, and I almost had to come to terms with the fact that actually it's the same thinking patterns, but just outworked in a different way. And one of the ways we're dealing with that was actually let's turn this situation that doesn't feel that nice into a game. So for me, like, oh, the roof's leaking in my kitchen. Oh, this is terrible. I'm going to have to buy a new house. I sort of catastrophize it. But if I turn it into a game of going, actually, let's work it out. What can I do within my power to, and it becomes a fun science experiment.
Yes.
And I soon forget that actually it might be costing me thousands of pounds down the line. But anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. And like I said, I really look forward to this book because, like I said, we often focus on the positive, but there's curiosity crosses a full spectrum. Can I touch on maybe to start with the positive side of curiosity, because I go around lots of schools and curiosity is always one of those values that's sort of painted big on the side, and I know in your book you really early on you talked about how almost every educator will say curiosity is brilliant, but actually they only pay lip service to it, and it gets forgotten. So I suppose, first of all, for our viewers, what would you say is the real benefits for curious learners and schools that embrace?
God. What isn't? So to begin with, and this is something I write about in that book, we are born with tremendous curiosity. And early on, it doesn't look like curiosity because, when you think about what a 4-month-old does, they can't do that much. They can't open things, they can't ask questions, they can't read in a book, but they are constantly paying attention to the world around them and noticing what's unexpected, what's a surprise. And, when you're 4 months old, everything is a surprise. Someone comes into the room you've never seen before, something appears in your glass you've never drunk before, an animal comes over that you've never encountered before. They're just, even much littler things. You put the blocks in when you're a little older, let's say a year, you put the blocks up in a certain way and they do something you didn't expect them to do. They lean over, they fall, whatever. And every time that happens, a baby notices and wants to know more. They want to get more familiar with the world. It's actually an urge to kind of decrease uncertainty. So going back to your thing about wonder and worry, curiosity is at its very heart both a drive, and you want to reduce it, and by reducing it, you feel it again. So there's a paradox, isn't it, at the heart of what it means to be curious. So when you think about the baby and the toddler, their curiosity is what enables them to master the incredible number of things they master. They learn to talk, they learn what things are in their house, they learn what the routines are that make up everyday life, they become familiar with the people that surround them and the habits that are acceptable and unacceptable. All of that is driven by their need to know, their need to take whatever's surprising and make it familiar, understand it. So that drive to know is what gets us to preschool, you know what I mean? It's what gets us to the point where you're a talking, functioning, interacting human being. And that goes on being true. The single most powerful, it is the engine of learning. It's the most powerful component of learning is the urge to know. And, so many studies have shown that when a child, or an adult for that matter, encounters something that they actually feel some curiosity about, they learn it faster and they learn it better. They understand it more, they remember it longer. So if you had two groups of kids and one learned something, a list, a set of facts, whatever, a set of skills, because they felt they had to, and another group learned it because they really wanted to. There was something about it that seemed interesting, unsettling, something they wanted to know more about. There is absolutely no doubt that the group that learned it because they wanted to, it was designed to stir their curiosity, would far outpace the group that learned it because they had to.
And that would override, say, intelligence or IQ, or however you measure that would.
I would put it a little differently. Intelligence is important. It's something that's unpopular to say out loud, and many people, at least here in the United States, especially ironically, people at a very good college like Williams, which is where I teach, they want to say that there are no differences in intelligence. Well, there are differences, and the kid who learns much more easily than the kid who learns with great difficulty is always going to be different, slightly different on that dimension. But that's just only accounts for a little bit of what goes on, right, in a person's life and in school. And the kid who doesn't learn that easily, who's curious, is much more likely to catch up with the kid who learns easily. And especially if the kid who learns easily has not been encouraged to hold on to their curiosity. So I wouldn't go so far as to say it negates the differences between kids and intelligence, but it accounts for a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're very intelligent or not quite as intelligent, you're going to use that intelligence in a far more powerful way if you're curious in general, and if you're curious about the particular stuff you're learning. One more thing about that. Individual differences in in intelligence are not that big for the most part. In the general population, the difference just doesn't amount to that much. It's not that important. Whereas differences in how curious kids are can have a big impact on their lives in school.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that really struck me, particularly in the first part of the book, was just how children who felt safe and secure, how their curiosity was, fostered, cultivated, or even, or if you were to flip it around, maybe if they're insecure, their curiosity was inhibited.
Absolutely, and you only need to think about, some of this research actually was done with mice and rats. If an animal, but also with a human, is nervous, if they're cowering in the corner or avoiding some threat, of course they're not going to have the sort of, they're going to avoid the uncertainty that's inherent in curiosity. They're looking to protect themselves. And when you think about that with children, one form of security is feeling that there's someone nearby that you trust and can count on, your mom or your dad or your caregiver or whatever. As you get older, there are other forms of insecurity. Kids who are scared all the time in school, either because other kids are scary, or because the setup is threatening and challenging, or because adults are not that kind and welcoming and encouraging, they're not going to be able to explore, and therefore they're not going to be able to learn as well. I mean, it's not just that they're not going to be as happy, they're actually not going to learn. I want to say one more thing about that. Back to your question about what is curiosity good for? It is good. It's incredible. It's essential for learning, and accounts for every good kind of learning. But there's something else, which is it's good in and of itself. So curious people are happier people. And there's a great deal of research to show that one essential ingredient in well-being is a sense of curiosity.
Mm-hmm. So I think I read somewhere, it's probably a few years old now, I think it was a Gallup survey, big, massive, 100,000 plus, saying that one of the greatest predictors for general happiness was, did you learn something yesterday?
Oh, that's so awesome. So that's exactly fits with that.
And I think for me, and like you're saying, for me, I think curiosity is a great sense of, I get so much pleasure from it as well. And it's just great to learn, and then that just fuels more as well. So maybe we could turn to what would be an ideal environment for fostering curiosity. I know we talked a bit about having a safe environment, but what things help and what things hinder that?
Okay, great. So some of the things we've been talking about are a place that feels safe. So that could be home, or it could be school. I mean, I'm not quite sure what parameters you're putting on that, but let's say home or school.
I'm open.
Okay. So. Well, I'm going to think about home or school because I like to think about kids. And so a sense of safety, often for little kids, that means physical safety, but it also means that there's someone, it really means also a sense that there's someone nearby that you trust, that you feel attached to, that you feel close to. And that's why, you know, anybody listening who's taken their child to a park notices that even the most excited, exuberant, exploring child, every once in a while looks back to see if their grown-up is there with them. And, you know, over time, who that person is might change, and certainly it could be a teacher. So that's a piece of it. Another piece of it is a sense of things to be explored, of mystery, of surprise in the environment. And I have to admit, I watched a little bit of your TED Talk at my son's urging when I got your email. And that is what made it so riveting, that you were surprising your audiences with things.
Yeah.
And
Thank
so,
you.
You're welcome. It was wonderful. And so when we think about that for children, it's often allowing them to encounter things that are a little messy or a little unexpected, that allow for different kinds of interaction. So here, imagine the difference, for instance, between a very neat, polished, clean, modern piece of playground equipment and some shrubs and a little messy driveway or dirt path with water in it and some bugs and some stones. Honestly, there are things about the playground equipment that might be fun for certain kids. I have an 18-month-old grandson, and he really loves the playground equipment at the nearby school. But what's most enticing for children in terms of eliciting curiosity is the slightly messier, more unknown set of shrubs and dirt pile, and because there's more mystery in there. There's more to be explored. And that could be true in the social environment. It has to do with being around a variety of people or places. And it's not just physical, it's also intellectual. So especially as kids get older, and here I would say that anybody who's been around a 3, 4, 5-year-old knows that they ask an incessant number of questions, most of them. Why did we do it this way? Why is he called that? What happened when the dog did that? You know, what's this? Can I do this? And we now believe those questions are a really great measure of curiosity. And they're a tool for the kid too. That's a way to explore the world as much as picking up a rock or tinkering with something or peering under somewhere. Your questions allow you to explore the vast world of invisible things.
So I'm just thinking in one sense that the role of the teacher then, because a lot of teaching is just in one sense allowing the children to rediscover facts already known. Yes. And that's not going to be, listening to what you're saying, that's not going to be helpful for the child when they just realize they're just, it's basically a very, in one sense, a dull treasure hunt of trying to find the right answer. Whereas perhaps a teacher's role would be better suited to be like a co-discoverer.
Yes.
Or at least to try and camouflage the fact that they know the answers.
Well, so I would give a slightly complicated answer to that. It is true that, and again here, if anybody listening has watched a 2 or 3-year-old, they often discover things you already know, but it's very exciting to them because they don't know it. I'm trying to think of an example. Watching an ice cube melt. I'm trying to figure out why under some conditions water stays firm and hard, and why under other conditions it turns into a little pool of liquid. It's just one very banal example, but there are a million like that. And it's valuable not to forget that the experience of surprise and then satisfying that surprise by exploring is very powerful, and it's new to the kid, even if it's not new to the grown-up. So that's why we let kids explore even when we know what the answer is, because that's their way of building up their curiosity muscle is one way to put it. So it doesn't always have to be new, and yet the other part of what you said is so on target, which is that kids are very good at detecting what's inauthentic. And actually, there's a wonderful old study that shows that kids know when the teacher is asking a question to which they already have an answer in mind. And honestly, this is going to sound blasphemous, but I believe it to be true. I think that's why actually the Socratic method is overrated. Because that's based on the Platonic ideal that you, the teacher, knows the answer and you're helping the child or student discover the answer. And as you say, a lot of the time, the most interesting questions are the ones neither of you know the answer to, and you're working together to find it, and you genuinely are as interested and eager as your student or learner is. And I would add one last thing to that, which is I still think there's an incredibly important role for the knowledgeable, skillful teacher, because in principle, you are more experienced and more knowledgeable about how to satisfy curiosity. And if teachers think of themselves that way, it changes the role.
I think this, looking back on my childhood and also my experience going into schools, that the teachers that really stand out are the teachers that are still learning, even at the end of their careers. It's that sense of constant learning, and like you said, there's the pleasure of discovering things, and kids pick up on that.
And they also learn how to satisfy curiosity in ever more powerful, penetrating ways. So people who teach science, like even at the college level, the point is not to tell them what you know, but to show them how you find out. And one piece of that I think gets underrated, at least in schools in this country, is how wonderful it is to show your students the pleasure of not knowing. Mm-hmm. Now, that's never an end point. Now, there are many people in this country, anyway, who are very comfortable not knowing and staying unknowledgeable. They sort of hug their ignorance to them. I do not mean that. I mean, you think, oh, I don't know how a roof gets fixed, or I don't know why one slope keeps the water draining off and the other doesn't. Did you talk about a leaky roof before?
Yes.
Okay, so that's an example. Or I don't know how viruses make their way into people. I'd like to know. So that's the starting point, and you want your students to see you embrace that sense of not knowing, but always only as a first step, because the next step always has to be, and now I have to know, I want to know, how will I find out?
Yeah.
So that process, but it starts by demonstrating, sharing with your students how pleasurable it is to discover something that's worth knowing, but that you don't know. And I think teachers and parents too often try to hide their ignorance. They think they're supposed to seem knowledgeable, instead of, they could have a new idea in their mind, a new motto, which is seem curious.
Yeah, which gets back to what you said right at the start about how it's so hard when you're faced with big things like the pandemic to change your thinking on. Yeah. And there must be a raft of research in how what stops curiosity, whether it's you.
Fear stops curiosity, for one thing. So if you're too afraid, you shut down. And you have to learn how to push through that, which is what you said about the roof, what I felt about the pandemic. Fear, and then, oh my God, but I still have to know about it. I have to understand it. I want to know more. And honestly, in a strange twist of events that I wouldn't have predicted, at various times during our very long quarantine, because I'm still basically in quarantine, the most interesting part of the day is trying to work out the really knottiest puzzles about the science of contagion. For me, that's been a source of pleasure, not just because I want to know the answers and I think it will help me be safer or be a better citizen or whatever, but partly because it just feels good to understand what I didn't before, especially since it's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe now's the time to bring up this topic of wonder. I've mentioned the word a few times, and also you mentioned about how the value of surprise in lessons. So where would you say the relationship between wonder and curiosity is? Because some people will use the words interchangeably. What's your take on?
I won't use them interchangeably. I see wonder as one kind of curiosity, because, and maybe I'm misusing it or we have a different way of using it. For me, wonder sounds much closer to what I think of as awe, which is a very interesting and burgeoning field of research. So for me, awe is the sense that I'm in the presence of or encountered something that's bigger than me, and that sort of transcends my everyday understandings, but also my sense of what life is. So I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, this may seem trivial, but if I encounter a body of water that I know well, I have a pond right near my house, and I have a beautiful river that I can hike near 10 minutes away, and they're very beautiful, but I don't tend to feel awe in their presence. I might under some circumstances, but most of the time it's the river I know and the pond I know, and I see frogs or I swim or whatever. But if I go to the seaside, I spend time near the Atlantic, on the Atlantic Ocean every year. I'm filled with a sense of awe. And it's partly because of its vastness and its power, and the sense that it stretches both mentally and physically beyond what I can easily wrap my head or myself around. And I think that awe often elicits curiosity. And in some wonderful research by Liz Bonawitz, when they showed kids different kinds of clips from movies, some were funny and some were just pleasant about nature. But the ones that were awe-inspiring, that evoked this sense of vastness or mystery or something huge, what the kids learned and the kind of interest they had in those clips was much greater than in the other clips. So I think it's a very powerful kind of curiosity, or it triggers a very powerful kind of curiosity. But I think people feel curious all day long about things that do not evoke awe or wonder. How am I going to make this ice cream sweeter, for instance?
Yeah. So I think just listening to you speak, there's an element of wonder comes when it's safe awe, perhaps, in that you can go to an ocean and you can appreciate it because it's just vast. But if you're stuck in the middle of a storm and there's a fear element, then it all shuts down at that point, doesn't it?
That's right. But on the flip side of it, I mean, I've thought about this a lot in the last few months. The things that have evoked wonder or a sense of awe in me in the last few months have been a lifesaver. And I guess I misspoke before. Sometimes they're not huge, they're tiny. Often for me, they have to do with nature. Nature. I live in the countryside, and it might be, I'll give you a very seemingly mundane example. My husband has a big vegetable garden, and there are morning glories that grow on the side of the fence. And for anyone that doesn't know, ours are deep blue, purple, and they open during the day and they close at night. And it fills me with wonder when I see it happen. I've seen it my whole life, and I still think, how does that happen? That's so magical. I mean, back to you and some of the demonstrations you've given. So it partly does have to do, maybe it has to do with surprises that will not be easy to solve.
Well, I think Descartes said something along the lines of wonder is this sudden surprise of the soul. Which sometimes you just think, I can't beat that really. In that you've got the surprise, but there's something that connects you with nature as well at the same time.
That is so perfect. So as I mentioned, I have my first 2 grandchildren were born last year, and they live right next door to me. So I spend a lot of
brilliant.
Oh my God, it's so great.
Babysitter on tap as well.
I'm on tap all the time, and during quarantine, a huge amount of the time, because my kids had no daycare during that period of time, even though they were working. Well, one of the things that I think is very related to what we're talking about is that I not only raised 3 of my own children, but I'm a developmental psychologist. All I do is study early development, how children learn to talk, how they learn to think. Even so, every time one of my 2 grandchildren does something new, learns their first words, discovers how to play. The two of them live in the same house together, so they're discovering how to play with each other. I am filled with a sense of wonder. And it's what did you say, surprise of the soul?
I think sudden surprise of the soul. Now, I could be woefully misquoting him, but...
Someone should take responsibility for that quote. It might as well be you. It's exactly what I feel. And that's an example of something I know very well, how it works, how they learned their first words, what's involved in learning to play with another creature. Those are the things I study scientifically. But there's some piece of it that still evokes a sense of wonder and awe in me, a sudden surprise of the soul. And this is a point that would be, I think, would be interested to hear. I'd be interested to hear what you think. The old idea that getting knowledge will rip away your sense of wonder or awe, the magic of something, is not true at all. And in fact, my experience of wonder or awe when one of my grandchildren does something new for them, is a perfect example of that. It doesn't matter that I know a great deal about what's going on in that moment. I still feel wonder and awe, and it still makes me want to know more.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with you that you've got this almost initial wonder of, this is amazing. It's like looking at a beautiful flower. You can appreciate a flower and go, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
But then if you're a biologist and you understand all the different organs within that flower and how some of the petals are coated to attract bees to pollinate it, and then that doesn't rob the first wonder, that doesn't take the magic away. It just builds. And I think sort of knowledge a lot of times can just add a second layer or third layer of wonder.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes the problem is with a lot of schooling, and I think I touched on it in the TEDx talk that I did, was the explanation becomes the be all end all, and you rush to that, and you totally skip over that initial wonder moment. And for kids and for adults as well, you know how it works, but you've lost that wow out of it, and it's dull at that point.
You know, it's one reason, this is sort of going far afield, maybe too much of a tangent, but it's one reason why kids in school should get to spend time with active working scientists. Because many, not all, but many scientists remain in touch with that sense of wonder. It's what fuels their work. The question I know this great story, I don't know if I put it in that book, but I put it somewhere, about E.O. Wilson, the biologist, being at a conference somewhere, I believe, in South America. It was very warm. They were inside for all the talks, and then, this was years ago, and then the scientists, they were all biologists, stepped outside onto a patio to have their little tea and biscuits in the middle of the day. And suddenly E.O. Wilson, he was tall and sort of lanky, he was eating and talking to the other scientists, and he suddenly broke off a little piece of his cookie and kneeled way, way down onto the bottom of the patio floor and said, I just want to see which ant is going to come over and eat it. Now, he's the ant specialist of the world, and he was in his 70s or 80s when that happened. And I do think that sense of wonder or awe, even in the midst of all one's specific expertise, is very important to transmit to kids. And the best way to transmit that is to let them be around scientists who both know a lot and still feel some burning sense of curiosity and wonder about the things they study.
So maybe a final question just to touch on is, how, as adults, how can we keep that alive in ourselves?
That's a very good question, because I suppose the real question for many of us, if you're curious and you're a grown-up, you're probably going to stay curious, and you're going to keep feeding the curiosity, which makes you more curious or curious again. You've
almost become a survivor, haven't you? You've survived whatever education and environment was trying to knock it out of you. And
exactly. So this is a roundabout way of answering your question. When I go give workshops with teachers, I always start by asking them, so what's the thing most recently that you felt very curious about? And they always misunderstand my question. They think I'm asking them what they're curious about as educators. You know, why do kids behave or not behave, or how should I set up the blackboard, or what's the best book I should assign? And I'm not asking that. I'm asking them what has provoked great curiosity in their own lives. It could be related to education, but it might have nothing to do with their work as teachers. It might have to do with rivers or cooking or, you know, medieval history or viruses or whatever. And often when I push a little, some people in the room think, oh, I know what it is. I get it. I didn't know I was allowed to answer that, but I'll tell you, it's mushrooms or it's whatever. But there are always some teachers who really can't come up with an answer. They can't think of anything that's been bedeviling them in a good way. And so your question is, if you're that kind of person, whether you're a parent or a teacher or just an everyday citizen, and you don't feel some curiosity, or you don't know what you're really curious about, or you haven't felt it in a long time, what would you do? What would you do to stir it up? And I guess the answer is you allow yourself to dive into something about which you have great interest. So interest is key to curiosity. I'm not interested in cars. I don't know who's driving what car. I don't remember people's cars. I don't notice them, and I never will. And it would not be a good way to get me curious. I am incredibly interested in food and cooking. And so if I were trying to sort of develop a part of my life that allowed me to be curious, I'd go for something that actually really interested me. And that may sound obvious and banal, but it's amazing how easily we forget that people will be their most curious when they're allowed to pursue something that actually really interests them. So I would say start with that. And I guess the second thing would be to notice when your own curiosity is piqued. What things stir up your need to know or your sense of wonder, and give a little more attention to that.
Mm. Yeah. Great advice. Well, Susan, thank you so much for spending your time and sharing your wisdom and your experience across both working in schools and in the psychology research domain. I really appreciate that. If you've not sort of read this book, I would suggest you pick it up. It's a great read and some wonderful stories. There's a particularly scary one with you climbing furniture at home. I think a parent's nightmare, so I won't give any more away. And I'm really looking forward to the book coming out in autumn or the fall, depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on. So thank you, Susan. Have a great day.
Pleasure. Bye.